advisor to the Peruvian government between 1980 and 1985.
Un asesor del presidente de la República.
He was an advisor to the President of Peru.
Okay. I think we have a vote. Yeah.
Perdón, me dije 1985, 1985.
We need to
I meant 1985 to 1990, excuse me.
That we have a vote. We will stand in recess for the duration of the vote, and as soon as we return, we'll pick up where we leave off. Thank you. We stand in recess. The hearing will come back to order. Mr. Yake, thank you. We're just going to be a few more minutes. I just want to try to establish a couple things here if we can. Let me ask you again. You say that Mr. R. Alberto Calvo is not somebody who's known to you. You never heard of him?
Así es.
That's correct.
Okay.
I have never heard of him, Mr. Chairman.
Fine. And what about Mr. Shafi?
Shafi, no.
S-H-A-F-I.
No,
No.
no lo conozco,
No.
ni lo tengo en
I don't know him,
comunicaciones que obran en mi poder.
What about
nor do I have him in the documents that I have here before me.
What about
en ese-
Mr. Oscar Rizzo Patron?
No, no, tampoco.
No, I don't know him either.
Okay. Just asking curious questions, see if you can identify any of these documents. Now, I want to understand then the substance of your testimony is that BCCI presented itself because of the need to find credit somewhere, because there was a numbered account, because there was security. The decision was made to get the line of credit from BCCI and put central bank money into BCCI in return. Is that accurate?
Sí, en ese sentido, si me permite, señor presidente.
Yes, if you'd
quiero
allow me,
precisar,
I'd just
esas
like
decisiones se
to
tomaron
explain these
paulatinamente.
decisions were
Voy a
taken
aclararlo.
gradually. Let me
En un primer
explain.
momento tuvimos
At the
información,
outset,
estoy
we
hablando de
had
abril de
information, here I'm talking about
1986,
April 86,
que el BCCI
that
tenía
BCCI
un
had
capital de un poco más de
capital
$1.000 millones
of a bit more than
en ese
$1
sentido,
billion, so,
el banco,
or $100 billion.
a través de su
So
directorio, decidió
through
que
the
tenía-
board of
podía
directors, we
depositar
decided that we could deposit approximately 10% of that amount
capital.
in capital.
Posteriormente, ante la
Later,
necesidad de mayores
In the
créditos,
face of our need to
este
get
porcentaje
more
aumentó,
credit, this
y por eso es que
percentage
tuvimos
went up,
en
and
algún
that was
momento
when
un poco más de $250
we had
millones.
a bit more than
Todo esto
$200
se
million
decidió,
on account.
a nivel
This was
primero
decided
técnico, o sea, no como
first
decisión,
at a
sino como
technical level. It
recomendación.
was
Se
a
hizo un análisis
recommendation, not a
en el banco.
decision.
Tenemos un
We
staff
have a staff in
muy
the central bank
profesional,
which is very professional.
de investigadores y de
They are
economistas
investigators
que
and
hacen los
economists,
informes,
and they draw up
son elevados a
reports,
las
and they are
gerencias,
taken
luego a la
to
gerencia general y
management,
luego al
and
directorio, quien
first to the
finalmente
general
toma
manager and then to the
Por eso es que
board of
no es
directors,
posible
and
hablar
that
de
is where
una
the
persona que
decision is
negoció
taken.
en el
So
Banco
you can't
Central.
talk about a person
Simplemente se
negotiating for the
establecieron
central
los
bank.
términos
The
concretos
terms, the concrete
de la relación
terms were simply established
de depósitos
for
y
the
de créditos. Y luego,
deposits and the credit.
se elevaba al directorio
And then
para
this
su
was
aprobación
taken
final.
to the board for its final approval.
Okay. And on August 7th, 1987, you received a memorandum which said in 3 paragraphs, let me read the paragraphs. Paragraph A, the legal establishment of the BCCI holding Luxembourg with headquarters in Luxembourg does not offer the guarantee of being the lender of last resort in case of a default in any of its operational units. B, the last 2 years of the bank in mention showed significant losses in operations in the options market. And C, it uses an unusual accounting system in that it does not make it possible to clearly identify the level of losses of the fiscal year or the activity that led to them. Now, those are the three substantive reasons that you decided to begin to pull money out. Is that accurate?
Así es, a este memorándum
That's
me referí
right.
yo en
I
mi
was
intervención
referring
inicial,
to that memorandum when I first
7 de agosto de 1987,
spoke. This was August
y dio lugar a otro
7,
memorándum
1987, and there was another memorandum to the general manager recommending the withdrawal of the funds specifically. This is a document dated July 21st, and it was approved by the board August 13th, and there it was decided finally to withdraw the deposits.
So in 1987, it was known that the bank had an unusual accounting system, and that was known in London. It was known that the bank had significant losses in the options market, not a traditional place for banks to be fooling around. And it didn't have the ability to be the lender of last resort, i.e. its deposit base, its capitalization was in question, correct? In 1987.
Sí, así es.
Well, this will
That's
be,
right.
this document will be made part of the record in sequential order. And I think, let me ask you this. What lessons, what is the impact of this experience in terms of the Federal Reserve in Peru in its dealings with BCCI?
Los tratos con la BCCI.
Bueno, nosotros siempre
Well,
hemos sido muy
we
cuidadosos
have
con las
always been
relaciones,
very
como dije al comienzo,
careful
con nuestros corresponsales.
in our relationship
En
with
este
our
caso,
corresponding banks. As I said at the
felizmente, no
outset,
tuvimos ninguna
this
pérdida,
time,
ningún perjuicio.
fortunately, we had no
Aspecto muy
loss
importante en el
or
caso del
any
Banco Central,
damage. This is very
porque de
important
acuerdo a
for
nuestra
our central bank
constitución
because
política
under
del
our
Estado, el Banco
constitution,
Central administra las
our
reservas
central
del país.
bank does administer
Es
our
por ello
country's
que nosotros
reserves,
somos
and
muy
that is why we are
cuidadosos
so
en
careful.
seleccionar los
I
Now,
repeat.
let me just ask you, when you say you had no loss, you were giving 50% on the dollar. So you took dollars and devalued them by 50% in order to be able to use BCCI in Panama. Isn't that accurate?
No, no, técnicamente, de acuerdo a
No,
las
technically,
relaciones entre bancos, eso no es
In
exactamente así.
interbank operations, this isn't exactly the way it is. Let me explain.
Los depósitos
The deposits in a bank obviously earn passive rates, and credits get active rates. There is a differential there. It's not a loss, but there is a differential between the passive rate it pays on the deposits and what it charges. This is really not a loss. This is a normal
Well, is it
banking.
normal to give 50 cents on the dollar?
No, no es que dimos
No,
50
it's not that they gave us 50 cents on the dollar. It was simply
un crédito,
a line of credit. And I want to recall once again what I already said. We have had deposits in banks that didn't give us any credits at all. It's not a matter of loss or gain. There was not an effective loss in the sense of the resulting account.
Try to move to the next panel, I think. Do you want to ask him any questions? Mr. Yake, thank you. Senator Cranston has a couple of questions, and then we'll move on to the next panel.
Just one moment, please. I think I have just two questions. First, how important is the phenomenon of drug money laundering in Peru? I'd like to ask you to please be as specific as you can in terms of the amounts of money involved and its relative importance within the system of your country.
Nosotros no tenemos información precisa
We
sobre el
don't have
blanqueo de
any
dinero
precise
en
information
Perú.
on money laundering in
Nosotros
Peru.
el Banco Central,
We in the central bank
damos medidas,
take,
normas básicas
set up standards or set down standards for exchange operations. And we have free exchange at the present time, so there is free availability and free transferability of foreign currency in Peru. Therefore, we can't give any figures that could be indicative of money laundering. Our banks work freely abroad with both in sales and in purchases and in all other banking transactions.
Do you have any impressions about the scale of money laundering without having any precise figures?
Well,
I don't have any information. I'm talking as an official of the central bank. I have an area under me which has to do with exchange operations, but I don't have any information on the magnitude of this. We haven't done any calculations of this kind.
What can you tell us about patterns of flight capital from Peru in the last 10 years?
Bueno, el Perú ha tenido una política exterior, una política económica,
an economic policy which has changed a great deal over time. We've had differential exchange rates, we have had certain restrictions on capital, and this has caused some capital flight, more than likely. An aspect which has changed over the last few months. There is a lot of capital returning now, and there has been a notable return of capital to Peru over the last few months.
What has caused that return?
In
the first place, we established an exchange policy, a free exchange policy. For instance, there is no need to give the central bank the value of exports. There is no export control, and there is a new policy, a new investment policy from the point of view of the rules in the country, as well as from the point of view of the rules of the Andean group to which we belong under the Cartagena Charter. So there are certain advantages for foreign investors now, and this is what caused a return of capital, not just foreign capital, but Peruvian national capital, which had been held abroad.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Yaque, thank you very much. Again, we appreciate your testimony, and very much appreciate your patience in waiting until today. Thank you. If we could have the second panel come up, Mr. Fausto Alvarado, Ms. Lourdes Flores, Pedro Cateriano, and Fernando Oliveira.
Right.
Okay.
Who's the person from Argentina here? Are we doing them separately? We got too much here.
Could I ask you each to stand, raise your right hand? Okay. You want to put the headphone on, then you understand. Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Yes.
Would you each identify yourself, please? State your name and your title or position. And bring the microphone close to you. Would you begin over here? State your name and your title.
I am Fausto Alvarado. I am a deputy. I am a member of the investigating committee on the illicit enrichment of former President. I am Fernando Oliveira. I'm president of the investigative committee of the Parliament of Peru, the Chamber of Deputies, examining the financial operations in Peru and abroad regarding the former president of Peru, Alan Garcia. I am Lord...
The commission said.
Excuse me. Pedro Cateriano. I am a deputy and member of the investigative committee regarding the presumed illicit enrichment of former Peruvian President Alan Garcia Perez.
Now, each of you has identified yourselves in a way that makes a statement about the former president, which is not what we're looking at here. We're looking at the question of BCCI, and I want to know the relationships, but I do not want to know unsubstantiated allegations or, or anything that isn't known as a matter of fact, that isn't supported by document or by testimony. What we really want to know is how BCCI operated in Peru, and to get a sense of what is known as a matter of record about its dealings there. I must ask you in the openings to try to be brief, because we really want to have some time for questions. We're running behind again. We cannot go into the afternoon, and we have Argentina, which we also want to cover afterwards. So the shorter you are with respect to the openings, the more time we'll have to ask some questions. Now, is one person going to speak for you in an opening? Is your chairman going to speak? I gather, Mr. Oliveira, you will be presenting an opening statement.
Así es.
That's correct.
Señor Presidente.
Fine. Well, we look forward to receiving it. And again, I repeat to all of you, we're very appreciative for your patience, and thank you for making this journey.
Mr. Chairman,
Señores miembros,
distinguished members of the U.S. Senate,
permítanme,
allow me,
como primeras palabras, expresar
as my first words, to express a feeling as a Peruvian, which all of us in the committee feel, and I'm sure almost everybody in the country. It is a feeling of indignation, an enormous concern to see the name of Peru involved in a case of corruption where the eyes of the world have been targeted. Yesterday, we saw the picture which showed how the BCCI operated, and an example of corruption of the central bank was given. This was the Central Bank of Peru, I mean. I have to say, very briefly, that despite the fact that this is a case where corruption of officers of the bank, the Reserve Bank of Peru, has been demonstrated, it is not representative of what we, the Peruvians, are. The great majority of Peruvians are hardworking and honorable. From their ancestors, the Incas, when they summarized the feelings of Peruvian people by saying Amasua, Amaqueya, Amasua. This means don't be lazy, don't be a liar, and don't be a thief. And I mean by that, that in Peru we live in a democracy where the authorities don't cover up the commission of crimes, and that's why in the Congress of my country, investigating committees have been set up to shed light on any commission of crimes or bribes, even up to the highest levels. These commissions, before the U.S. Senate and before the eyes of the world, are bound and determined to shed light on this case. And we have come here with a spirit of mutual cooperation between the two investigations which you are presiding over so well, Senator Kerry, and the investigations being carried on by our investigative committees, because unfortunately, we must say that corruption transcends party lines. It does not distinguish as between ideologies. It does not respect frontiers or borders. We can say here that the BCCI are initials not of Bank of Credit and Commerce International, but mean the Bank of Crime and Corruption International. And we have to defeat corruption everywhere, wherever it is, and we have to close ranks and fight together, all of us who fight for the cause of justice. That is why I've come here to
nuestro pedido de colaboración,
buttress our request for collaboration insofar as possible, because we are members of an investigative committee which has to expose
al Congreso del Perú, a la Cámara de Diputados del Perú,
its findings to the Peruvian Parliament, and we will reveal things which can be revealed so that the authorities of the world can support us in our investigations as well.
Tendremos que reservar
Moreover, we have to reserve some investigations that are still ongoing and which are still being confirmed or worked on. I will refer fundamentally to the operation of deposits of the International Reserves of Peru in BCCI, in its Panama branch, and the operation of resale of 14 Mirage jets which belong to the state of Peru, and in which BCC also participated, especially in its London office.
El año
In
1986, el Banco Central de Reserva del Perú
the Central Bank of Peru deposited in Panama, in the BCCI, substantial amounts of our international reserves.
Lo hizo
It did so
mediante una decisión aprobada en mayo de 1986.
Or made in May of 86.
Y sucesivamente los depósitos fueron alcanzando
deposits were made reaching substantial amounts,
en algún momento llegaron a superar los 270 millones
even
de dólares.
exceeded $200 million.
Let me just interrupt you there so I can ask a question as we go. The question would be asked by the casual observer, so what? The bank competed, there were other banks that wanted to get into extending a line of credit because this meant money to them. They're in the business of making money. Peru needed an outlet. So what's so strange about that? And I'm just trying to sort of take us down the road here a little bit.
Sí, senador Kerry.
Yes, Senator Kerry.
Yo comprendo, pero le rogaría
I
que
understand, but
brevemente
I
pueda
would
terminar
ask you to let me finish this short statement.
Inmediatamente iba a sustentar.
Immediately, I was going to go to this.
Okay,
it was
fine.
argued.
I apologize. I wanted to just try to focus on that because I think it's so critical.
Okay.
But that's okay. You go ahead.
Okay. Se argumentó,
it was
como
argued,
dijo el funcionario del
as
Banco Central
the
de Reserva
officer
que me ha
of the
precedido, que había la
Peruvian Central
posibilidad
Bank
de
already
embargo
said that
de
there was the
nuestras reservas
possibility of
internacionales.
attachment of our international
Mediante
reserves.
estudios jurídicos que se
And by
realizaron,
means of
se
legal
eligió
studies
la plaza de
conducted,
como
Panama
una
was
plaza que
chosen
otorgaba
as a
seguridades para
place
evitar el
which
embargo
offered
de la banca
security
internacional
to
que podía cobrar
avoid
los adeudos
such
que tenía el
seizures
Perú,
or
y los cuales habían entrado en
attachments,
rebeldía por una decisión política
because
del gobierno.
the government of Peru had
Pues
entered
bien,
into
en
a
la plaza
kind
de
of
Panamá, sin
rebellion.
embargo, en mayo del 86, ya el Banco Central de Reserva
in
tenía
Panama,
depósitos
the
en una serie de
Reserve
bancos
Bank had
de prestigio mundial,
reserves
como es
already in a number
el
of prestigious
Deutsche
banks. The
o el
Deutsche
Südamerika,
Südamerikanische
o el
Bank,
Banco
Sudameris, Bancos
o el Banco
Tokyo,
de la Nación
the
Argentina,
Bank of the
o el Swiss
Argentine
Bank
Nation, the
Corporation.
Swiss Bank
Quiere
Corporation.
decir
This
que no
means
necesariamente se
not
tenía que ir a
necessarily
depositar
did they
las
have to
reservas
go
internacionales del
and
Perú en el
deposit
BCCI.
Peru's
En segundo
reserves in the
lugar,
BCCI as well.
nosotros tenemos que decir
Also, we have to
que
say
en la decisión
that in the
de
decision
elegir
taken
el
to
BCCI de
choose
Panamá,
BCCI in
hubieron
Panama,
trámites
there were
ciertamente irregulares,
some
por
very
decirlo menos.
irregular
Y no lo
procedures
dice
used, to say the least.
el diputado Fernando Olivera ni los miembros de una
Fernando
comisión
Olivera
que por lo demás es una comisión
is not the
multipartidaria
only one saying
donde
this,
están
and
representados
neither
todos los
is my
sectores del
commission.
país,
We are a
incluyendo la izquierda
bipartisan
marxista.
commission representing all
Lo
the
dice la
political sectors,
Contraloría
including
General de la
the
República, que es la
Marxist Party.
institución
But our
autónoma
office
encargada de
of
velar por los
Central
recursos
Audit says this.
públicos.
This is the
Lo
office
dice
which
en
is
su
supposed to
informe número
supervise our
008 del año 88,
account.
que es un examen
Report
especial
008
al manejo de las reservas
of
internacionales
this year
y las
does
imposiciones
say
efectuadas de los
this
fondos en moneda extranjera en
in its
instituciones
report
financieras del
on
exterior.
how foreign deposits
La Contraloría
were
General de la
handled.
República
The Comptroller
sostiene,
General of the
después de un
Republic
examen
says
documentado,
that after a
que se
documented
efectuaron
study that
depósitos hasta por
deposits were made
270
up to
millones en cuentas
$270 million
cifradas,
in numbered
aperturadas
accounts
en el BCCI
opened in
Overseas,
BCCI
obviando criterios de
overseas
seguridad
following
y
procedures
reciprocidad
for
crediticia
credit
mínima.
reciprocity
En efecto,
and
se señala
to get numbered
que para
accounts. It is said
decidir
here that
la
to
colocación de las
decide
reservas
to
internacionales del
place
Perú
the
no se
Peruvian
incluyó
reserves
toda la
there,
información mínima
not all
requerida
minimum
como criterios generales para
information
aprobar
was
corresponsalías con
even
bancos en el
considered,
exterior,
as is
de
usually
acuerdo a lo
considered to
normado
make
por el
such a
propio
decision,
directorio.
and in
En
accordance with the
efecto,
rules of the Board
no
of
se
Directors
incluyó
itself.
información sobre los
Information
estados
was not
financieros del
included on
BCCI
the
Overseas.
accounts, and
Solamente
the
se hizo el
state of
análisis sobre
accounts
el
of
BCCI
BCCI
Holding de Luxemburgo.
overseas.
Por eso es que se
The
consideró
only accounts
que había un
included
capital de
were
$1.000
the
millones de
holding
dólares,
committee,
cosa que no
company
era
rather,
representativa en el caso del BCCI Overseas de Panamá.
in
No
Luxembourg,
era
and
lo
this
mismo,
didn't have
como
anything
no
to
lo es
do
hasta
with
la
BCCI in
fecha,
Panama. It still doesn't.
el holding con
Panama
sede en
is not the
Luxemburgo.
same thing
Sin
as the
embargo,
holding
de una
company
manera
with headquarters in Luxembourg.
engañosa, se
So
consideró
in a
el BCCI
deceitful way,
Holding Luxemburgo para
BCCI in
poder
Luxembourg's
justificar
records were
depósitos
used to
hasta por $100
justify
millones de dólares en un
deposits up to
inicio.
$100 million
Tampoco
at
se
the outset.
analizaron
Neither was there an
los estados
analysis
financieros
made
del
of
BCCI
the
Overseas de los
financial
3 últimos
situation
años,
over the
señalando
past 3
equivocadamente
years,
que el Banco Central de
saying
Reserva
in
del
error
Perú
that
contaba
the
con
Bank
datos hasta
of Peru had
1981.
data up to
Se
1981.
entiende que
This
por
was not
razones de
so.
seguridad era
It
necesario
was
evaluar el
understood that it was
BCCI
necessary
Holding para
to
efectos de
evaluate
requerir un
BCCI
comfort
Holding
letter.
in order to get to issue a letter.
En segundo lugar,
In the second place,
se omitió evaluar
was
los
omitted
antecedentes del BCCI Holding
to talk
y de sus
about the
principales
background of
subsidiarios,
BCCI Holding Company
considerando que
and
no eran
its principal
corresponsales del
branches
Banco
because
Central de
these were
Reserva del
not
Perú.
corresponding banks of the
Carecían
Central
de
Bank of
exposición
Peru,
y en los archivos
and there
del Banco
was
Central de
nothing
Reserva
about
del
them
Perú
in
cobraba
the
información referencial cualitativa
in the
y
files of
cuantitativa de
the
estos
bank,
bancos,
whereas there was
contenida en la solicitud
qualitative
del
and
BCCI
quantitative
Luxemburgo para
information
abrir
about
sucursal en el
these
Perú
banks
de febrero de 1985.
when they came to try to
Dentro de
open
esa
accounts in
información
Peru in February of
existía un
1985.
reporte del
There is a
IFCA,
report
que es la institución
which is
de
the
Banking
Institution of Banking Analysis Limited of
que
London,
señalaba al
which
BCCI S.A.
said
ya en
that
1985
BCCI already in
como un banco
1985 was
agresivo
an
e innovador
aggressive,
y que en
innovative
varias
bank
ocasiones
which on a
había
number of
molestado
occasions
a las
had
autoridades supervisoras como el Bank
bothered
of England.
the
Asimismo,
supervisory
al evaluar a dicho
authorities
banco en
such as the Bank of England.
1985,
In
desde el punto de vista
1985,
legal,
from the legal
lo
point of
consideraba en el
view,
lugar 4 de
it was
5,
considered
es decir,
to
lo
be
ubicaba en
in
uno de
a
los
ranking
últimos lugares.
4 out of 5. In other
Si
words,
bien
it
la
was ranked
gerencia
very
de
low.
operaciones internacionales
Though
manifiesta no haber tenido
the
a su alcance
management
Whose ranking was that?
¿Quién está escribiendo? ¿Quién está escribiendo?
la Contraloría General de la
the
República
General
del país.
Office of the Controller of Peru.
La Contraloría General de la República del Perú.
The General Office
Esta
of
información
the
está
Controller of
contenida
Peru.
en
This
el informe
information
número
is in Report
008-88.
88
Me
of the year
solicita una
88.
interrupción el diputado Pedro Cateriano.
Pedro
Señor
Cateriano
Presidente,
has asked to say something.
General de la República
The
de
General
acuerdo a
Office of the
nuestra
Controller of
Constitución,
Peru under our
un
Constitution
organismo
is
que
a
cuenta
body
con autonomía
which is
y se encarga de
autonomous.
cautelar el manejo del dinero del Estado.
I just wanted to know who had made that particular judgment for the record. But I do need to get through, I want to get through so we can try to focus on a few areas here.
Hacer es tratar de enfocar sobre
Please continue.
unos puntos. Continúe, por favor.
Sí, correcto.
Yes, sir.
El informe de la Contraloría
The report of the Office of the Controller
señalando que
continues
si bien
saying
la
that though
Gerencia de Operaciones
the Office of International Operations says that it did not have this information at its disposal, it knew that it existed and it could have gotten it.
En todo caso, la administración del
In
banco
any case, the administration or the management of the bank proposed that this corresponding relationship be set up and refrained from telling the board about this information at that time.
En tercer lugar,
In the third place,
señala la Contraloría
the Office of the Controller says that documentary evidence does not exist before the approval of the corresponding relationship,
y o negociado otras
that
propuestas
other
concretas
concrete
de líneas de
proposals
crédito,
for lines of credit
a
were or
efectos de
were
tener
not
alternativas entre las cuales
negotiated
escoger mejor,
to decide which would be
considerando los
the best,
criterios de seguridad.
using the
y de
criteria
mínima
of
reciprocidad.
security and minimum
Se estima
reciprocity.
que la
It is
propuesta del BCCI
believed that
fue la
BCCI's
única
proposal
que
was
existía
the
y
only
se tomó
one
en condiciones
that
que distan de una
existed
política
and
de
was
mínima
adopted
reciprocidad.
in conditions that are very far
Es
from
más,
minimum reciprocity.
el informe de la
Moreover, the
Contraloría
report of the Office of the Controller
señala
also says
que
Excuse me. Do you know it was the only proposal? You're saying it was believed it was the only proposal. Do you know, was it the only proposal, or might there have been others?
no.
¿Podrían haber habido otras propuestas?
Fíjese usted,
no.
señor presidente, ese es el
Mr.
dicho
Chairman, this
de los
is
funcionarios
what
del
the
BCR,
officers
que
were
argumentan
saying,
para poder
who were arguing
justificar.
to justify.
Nosotros creemos
We
que
think
justamente lo que debió haberse
precisely
hecho
that what
es
should have
buscar
been
otras
done was that
propuestas.
other
Mayor
proposals
razón
should have
cuando
been
el Perú
sought,
ya sostenía
especially
relaciones
because
con bancos
we
de la propia
already
clase Panamá,
had
como el Swiss Bank Corporation, el Banco
relations with the
el
Bank
Banco
of
de la Nación
Tokyo, the Swiss
Argentina,
Bank, the
o el
Bank
propio
of the
Blades, que era una
Argentine
institución vinculada a
nation.
Latinoamérica
There
para
were
el
a
desarrollo,
lot
en el
of
cual se
banks
podían
in
colocar
Panama with
reservas
which
internacionales.
relationships already existed with
Excuse
Peru.
me for interrupting you, but I just want to understand. You're saying that you have found, as a matter of fact, that no other proposal was solicited. Is that accurate?
Eso es lo que nosotros
This
hemos
is
indagado
what
en
we
nuestra comisión
have investigated in our investigating
Ellos
committee.
sostienen
They say
Only one proposal?
Fíjese usted, la
Sir,
conclusión que
the
nosotros
conclusion
estamos sustentando
that
aquí,
we are
justamente por eso
supporting
estoy
here, and
exponiendo
that is
de
why
manera
I
documentada,
am giving you this
es que
documented
hubo
explanation, is
aquí
that there was
en la decisión de
here
colocación
in
de
the
las reservas
decision to
internacionales
place
de Perú en el
Peru's
BCCI,
international
una
reserves in
fuerza
BCCI,
poderosa
a powerful
hizo,
force at work,
hacer
which
decisiones muy rápidas,
caused decisions to be taken
Un
very
informe de
rapidly.
3 páginas,
A three-page report,
solo de 3 páginas,
only
y
3
referido al BCCI
pages
Holding de Luxemburgo,
on
que
BCCI
decidió
Holding
que
Company
se
in
coloquen las reservas
of Luxembourg
internacionales del
was
Perú
what
en
made
este banco,
the decision be
en
taken
cantidades
to
realmente
place
de una gran
huge
concentración.
amounts of Peru's reserves in
Estaba
Panama.
leyendo la conclusión
And I was reading the conclusion
respecto a la reciprocidad
about reciprocity.
que percibió el Perú por esos
That
depósitos que hizo en
the
el
reciprocity
BCCI.
that
Dice
Peru
la
got.
Contraloría
The Office of
la
the Controller said that
Banco
reciprocity
Central de Reserva
that
del
the
Perú
Reserve
mantuvo
Bank of
con el
Peru
BCCI
got with
fue siempre
BCCI
superior
was
a la
always
recibida.
greater than what it
250
got.
millones de depósitos
250 million in deposit versus about 85 million in lines of credit.
muy superior a la que
This is
mantenía con
much
otros bancos con los
greater
que
than the
trabajaba,
differential
no
with
encontrándose
other banks.
evidencia de
No
los
evidence
motivos
has been
de
found
esta
for any
significativa
reason
concentración
for
de
this
recursos.
significant concentration of resources in this one bank.
Now, the gentleman from the reserve asserted that no deposits were lost, that nothing was lost to the people of Peru. Is that accurate? That in effect, all the deposits that were made were then withdrawn, so there was no loss ultimately?
La pérdida se puede cuantificar
The losses
de
can be
varias maneras.
quantified in a number of different
En primer
ways.
lugar,
First of all,
justamente con el concepto de reciprocidad.
using the concept of reciprocity, Peru needed lines of credit, and
Colocó sus reservas
it placed its international
internacionales sin obtener
reserves
las líneas de
without
crédito en
getting
igual proporción.
lines of credit in equal
segundo lugar,
proportion. Secondly,
El funcionario del Banco Central de
the
Reserva
officer
ha
of the
obviado
Central
decir
Bank
que
forgot
cuando en mayo
to
del
say that in
86
May
y
of
junio del
1986 and June of
se abrieron las
86, when the
cuentas
accounts
en el
were
BCCI,
opened in
se
BCCI,
mantuvieron $15 millones
$15 million
en cuenta corriente,
were held
que
in
no
a
percibe
checking
intereses.
account that doesn't earn any interest at
Y
all.
ciertamente, eso ya es un perjuicio
And this
concreto.
is certainly concrete
En tercer
damage.
lugar,
Thirdly,
hubieron depósitos
there were
realizados por
deposits
encima
made
de los límites
above the
autorizados por el
limits
Banco Central de
authorized by
Reserva,
the Central Bank
permitiendo
of Reserve,
justamente que haya un
allowing
beneficio por cuenta del BCCI.
allowing BCCI to earn a profit. And we have to say, to reach conclusions about why we feel that this conduct was irregular and suspicious and even criminal, as District Attorney Morgenthau alleges, is that there were very concrete observations made in 1987 regarding BCCI situation in the world, which have been mentioned here. There are the reports which already recommended withdrawal of deposits in July of 1987. These were reports from London and which were taken up by the central bank's relevant department. But despite that,
justamente se mantuvieron cantidades sustanciales.
Substantial amounts were maintained at least until December of 87 and January of 88. Coincidentally, that is when Panama entered into a crisis because of the denunciations or accusations against Manuel Noriega. Mr. Flores has asked me, or Ms. Flores has asked to speak.
The Central Bank received information regarding the bad situation of the BCCI around July 1987. Although arguing that some credits should be paid, funds were not retired up to, they began to retire them, but they didn't finish retiring them up to December 1988. That's something that for us sounds really curious. Although there were very clear reports saying that there was no reciprocity and that the given argument in 1986 that we wanted to protect funds, that was the main argument. We are trying to protect funds. We are trying not to be withdrawn. Nevertheless, knowing that we were in a risky situation, even more risky than the risky of a peers, we maintain our reserves up to December 1988.
Now, have you discovered anything with respect to the bank and its dealings, or with respect to officials who are responsible? Have you discovered anything concrete as to why that money was not withdrawn more rapidly? Do you have any answer to that?
Justamente a eso iba.
That was just what I was getting to, Mr. Chairman.
Nosotros empezamos esta
We
indagación
began this
porque
investigation
dentro de lo que es nuestro
because
trabajo de examinar
within our
las
job, which is to
investigaciones,
examine investigations and
operaciones
operations,
vinculadas al
financial
patrimonio del
operations
presidente
having to
García,
do with
en el año
President
87
Garcia's
se publicó
estate.
en una revista
In
del
1987,
Perú,
there
la
was
revista
published in
el
a
expresidente
magazine,
del Perú
Oiga,
tendría una
the
cuenta
fact that the
en el
President of
banco,
Peru had an account
BCCI por
in BCCI for
$450,000.
$450 million, and that was where the connection came with the work of our committee.
Luego de haber sostenido
After
reuniones con el fiscal
having had meetings
Morgenthau,
with District Attorney Morgenthau
sucesivas en el mes de mayo y en el mes
in
de
May
junio,
and
por
then
cuenta de
again in
miembros de la
June,
comisión,
on the
hemos
part of members
descubierto
of the committee, we
que
discovered that
toda esta irregular
all of
y
this
sospechosa
irregular and suspicious
y comportamiento
behavior in
respecto a
these
las reservas internacionales
transactions
del Perú con el BCCI
vis-a-vis
tenía una
our
causa.
reserves
Y la
and
causa
BCCI had
era
a
el soborno.
cause, and the cause
Era el
was
pago
bribery.
de
It
comisiones
was a payment of
delictivas
commissions, illicit
a
commissions,
funcionarios del Banco
to
Central de Reserva
officers of the central bank
a otras personas
and to
que aún
other
están por
persons
determinarse.
which are still to be
Se ha
identified, which
comprobado
remain to be
y
identified.
obra los documentos
We have seen and we have
en la Fiscalía
the
de Nueva
documents
York,
exist in
y
New
así lo
York,
refiere
as
el fiscal
stated
Morgenthau,
by District
en la
Attorney
demanda que
Morgenthau
presenta
in the
ante
complaint he filed
los juzgados, la Corte Suprema
to
correspondiente.
before the corresponding court, he
Quisiera
says
que,
the
por favor, la
following,
diputada Lourdes Flores
and I
lo
hope
lea.
that Ms. Lourdes Flores will read this out in English.
You know it.
Thank you.
You know, it's the third point of the indictment saying that defendants authorize and cause to be authorized the payments of bribes and kickbacks to agents of other banking and financial institutions. By virtue of that practice, defendants attempted to avoid and did avoid scrutiny by other banking and financial institutions. In 1986 and 1987, to obtain deposits from a banking relationship with the Central Reserve Bank of Peru, defendants Abedi and Nagvi authorized and directed employees of the BCC group to open a bank account in a Swiss bank in Panama to transmit bribes and kickbacks in the amount of a percentage of these deposits maintained by the Central Reserve Bank of Peru to two senior officers of that bank. The total of such payments was approximately 3 million. But you were also speaking of the 87 documents or possibilities. Yes, up to now, we have received some documents showing us that there were very close relationships, not precisely from officers of the bank, but from people outside the bank in a very high level in our government.
Well, I would appreciate, what we would like to do is receive those documents into the record, if we may, because they certainly go to the question of a pattern of behavior. But again, I don't want to turn this into a trial court or something, or into an accusatory panel. So I want to do that within the record, and we'll decide whether we'll keep, how to treat those in the terms of the record. But you've established, both through your testimony and through the indictment, that there is an allegation sufficient to bring an indictment with respect to the question of payoffs being made in order to solicit the business. And you have described the inconsistencies in the decision-making that seem to support the notion that something happened. Yes?
Definitely. And we think that the cause of this behavior and the decision to place Peru's international reserves in BCCI was corruption. And here we have a document of the Swiss Bank Corporation in Panama proving that BCCI oversees of Georgetown Grand Cayman. From there, transfers were made to the Security Bank, to the Swiss Bank in New York, and transferred from there to an account in Panama of the Swiss Bank. These were the bribes for these officers. We don't know who handled these accounts. We know that the accounts were opened by Leonel Figueroa and Hector Nera, the president and the general manager at the time, according to the accounts filed by Morgenthau. But there are other people under the Selva Negra and Terra Firme codes, and this requires some clarification, because we are convinced that there are other authorities higher up who intervene, as I am about to explain. I think it is important to say that in the indictment by the grand jury, two people are specified, Abidi and Nasby, who ordered these transfers. This implies a very high-level relationship in BCCI, not even at the officer level, who we've said participated in the transactions with BCCI. Cateriano has also asked to speak. Deputy Cateriano. Mr. Chairman, it's also important to underscore that the usual practice of the Peruvian Central Bank in making this kind of a transaction is to have it done by the officials and technicians. Now, in this case, Panama, the general manager and the president of the Central Bank of Peru went to Peru themselves. This is very unusual, and this was something that the Peruvian Central Bank did not do in carrying out this kind of operation normally. Because in Peru, the members of the board of directors are political. They are named by political people, the President of the Republic, in the case of the President, and the members of the board, including there are 4 named by the President and 3 named by the Senate. That is why the function they carry out is not really technical. It is basically political. So traditionally, in the central bank, technicians, experts carry out this sort of operation or transaction. I would like to continue, if I may. The contracts were signed with the central bank by the following, or for the central bank by the following, or with the central bank by A.M. Bilgrani, Christian Nassin, J.M. H. Bisui, and Akhtar Qureshi. We have discovered in our investigation in our committee the entry into the country of 2 persons involved in this BCCI scandal, and which are have been convicted for drug money laundering in a Tampa court. This is a document dated 1991, which I will give the committee in a spirit of mutual cooperation. In this document that I'm going to give you, it is proven that this Pakistani national Bilgrani Avida entered Peru from Panama on the 18th of December of 1986. A great coincidence here. That same date, General Manuel Antonio Noriega traveled to Peru too. And why did he go to Peru? To be decorated by President Alan Garcia with the highest decoration offered by the Army. Here is the proof of that. The relationship with General Noriega included unrecorded visits, as the Kerry Committee heard from Mr. Blandón, who was the Consul General in New York of Panama, and who said that there was a disappearance in his official visit for 6 hours. We also see here we have also recorded another entry into Peru of another person who has also been convicted in Tampa, Anjat Awan Malik. This is a person who had a great deal to do with the management of the personal accounts of corrupt people, such as being the personal banker of General Noriega. He entered Peru January 18, 1988, and stayed until there was a crisis in Panama, and then this person, Anjat Anwar Malik, according to some information which has reached the Commission, may be the personal banker of our own former President Alan Garcia.
Yeah, but that's not, let me just, I really don't want comments according to somebody, maybe. I mean, these are the allegations that I'm really not interested in, and the committee doesn't want. And I want to caution you against that. I want to know about BCCI specifically, but I do not want to know about somebody else's rumor or allegation at this point. It's not going to be relevant to what the committee's trying to decide. I think we've really almost established, I mean, the critical component here, the critical component is the pattern of visits by people and the people that they met with or talked to, the degree that normal procedures were not followed, the degree to which the bank specifically undertook to meet with people in ways that were irregular and so forth. I think it's the question of sort of influence and movement, but not allegations by people outside.
Let me state this thing.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. Chairman, I am referring to concrete facts.
nosotros tenemos informes
We have
que a eso
reports
se remiten. Yo comprendo
stating these things. I understand what you meant when you said what you just said. I understand very well. But this has a connection, and the allusions are relevant. I will reserve referring to the reports of very highly reputable investigators, private detectives such as Kroll and Associates, who investigated Saddam Hussein, Duvalier, Marcos. I will reserve that for now, and I will talk about the Lark report, because I don't want anybody to
I appreciate.
interpret what I'm saying as being off the subject. But I am going to give you grounds with documents to show how there is a connection in connection with the decision to place our reserves in BCCI. Did you want to say something, Senator Kerry?
No, I appreciate it. I want specifically to see the connection with BCCI and the decision very much. But let me just say, we've been going on for almost an hour now for a short opening statement. And we need, although I've interrupted it a number of times, we're going to need to try to bring this tight into a circuit. But what I need, and I think you've been doing it, believe me, I think it's been very helpful that you've showed the deviation from procedure and you've showed the pattern. What I want to understand is, were there any specific meetings that you're aware of and so forth? Thank you.
Yeah. The main thing you are asking, and I think you are right on that, is that if there was a personal relationship which was not relation just with the formal requests which are useful in these cases, which are common in these cases. And we do think there were. In 1986, Mr. Morgenthau has established that former President Alan Garcia was consulted. That's a first fact which has been demonstrated.
Consulted by whom?
He didn't tell us exactly who he was, but there are some other facts which I think could help. Mr. Bilgrami was in Peru in 1986. What he said is that representatives of BCCI spoke with him, met him, and the decision was made at that level. We have that record.
Do you know the name of R. Alberto Calvo?
No, I don't, but Mr. Cateriano could explain you exactly who he was.
Well, am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's just what we're getting to, if you'll allow me. I have a document here which we have obtained from the office of BCCI in Miami, Florida, dated February 1987, February 10th, 1987. This is a document to Mr. Chafee, and it says the following. Mr. Oscar Rizo Patron called from Lima to confirm that the President of Peru at any moment during the course of next week, 16 to 20 February, can receive you. Because of the floods and other situations, the President Garcia is traveling in the interior of Peru. Mr. Rizo Patron suggests 2 days on your schedule for this visit, so as to give time for this meeting. We will give you this document too, Mr. Chafee.
I have this document. Let me just interrupt you if I may. This is from, now let me just establish this document. This is a February 10th memo to Mr. Chafee. From whom? Do you know?
No, somebody at the bank probably.
Signed
But it is
by someone called Caesar. Oh, Cecil.
And it is from the BCCI Bank, Latin American and Caribbean region, based in Miami, Florida, correct?
Yes.
All right, well, that document will be placed in the
Así es.
record.
That's right.